Hey folks, good to have so many of you here as always. And I'm Scott Giles. I'm a certified hypno coach and a diplomate of the National Guild of Hypnotists. The the work that I do, hypno coaching, is a combination of the hypnotic arts and sciences and life coaching. The two merged together are much more effective than either one alone. When I do these live videos, I'm kind of leaning more toward the hypno coaching side than I would say the hypnotic work specifically. So this material is intended to help people kind of manage their lives more effectively and become a better version of themselves. Now, what I want to talk about today is having a victor's script in your life instead of a victim's script. Now, I want to drop a footnote. This comes from the work of Dr. Fred Luskin, a psychologist who has done a lot of terrific work in the whole area of forgiveness. And I first encountered this concept in his book. Now, we all talk to ourselves. We maintain a continuous internal dialogue, which is how we make the world make sense. We're always trying to explain it to ourselves. But evolution's played a trick on us. The trick that we get played is that the brain is wired in such a way that it remembers negative things much more readily than the positive. The reason for this is pretty clear. Negative recollections make a creature fearful, and fear helps a creature survive, whereas fearless creatures tend to become dinner for larger creatures. So because it has an adaptive advantage, fear is almost the default setting in the human brain, a negative expectation about events. So if you ask a person to give me a list of the good things that have happened to you, you get a pretty short list. If you ask, let me have the list of all the wrongs and hurts done to you, you get a much longer list. That's because the brain remembers the negative more readily. So it becomes very easy for us to kind of get into this victim script, this belief that life isn't fair and that people are taking advantage of us because we're remembering all the negative stuff, not the counterexamples to it. But Luskin pointed out that very often, the difference between feeling like a victor over the problems of life and feeling like a victim are they're just two sides of the same coin. You can just describe events differently. Now, I came from a pretty rocky family of origin, and if I wanted to tell myself a victim script, I could easily do that. And I could blame all my problems on stuff that happened to me as a child. But what I say is that, my childhood was far from perfect, but it's over. I don't want to revisit it. I tell myself a victor's story looking at the same experiences. Instead of all these mean people hurting me, it's look how strong I turned out to be, that I overcame all of that and was able to put together a meaningful life for myself. They tried their best to hold me back, and they failed. That's a victor's script. So you want to get past this negative wiring in the brain. And one of the ways to do that is to become aware of your own inner dialogue. Now, most of the time we don't do this. We're not aware of the words and stories we're telling ourselves. But you can become aware of it and learn to parse it. And when you hear yourself saying in the privacy of your mind, well, that's because of such and such, ask yourself, well, does that sound like a victim? Or does that sound like a victor? And when you realize that you've said something in a way that sounds victorious, give yourself a psychological pat on the back, a well done. And if you realize, well, that really sounds kind of like I'm playing the victim here, don't beat yourself up for it, but just change the channel in your mind as quickly as you can. You want to be intentional about what you tell yourself. Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, The Laws of Success, one of the very first people in the positive thinking movement, his last book contains a concept called drifting. And you're drifting when you live your life in such a way that you're letting external events or other people shape what happens to you. He thought this was a terrible mistake. You want to be intentional about how you move through your own life. And the way you become intentional about that is by paying attention to what you tell yourself in the privacy of your mind. And then you can keep clear about who you are, what you want from your life, that you're going to be the CEO of your own life, and you can resist the temptation to just give in and do what other people expect. Now, what do we do if we've had a whole chain of failures and we feel like, well, we're a victim because nothing's working out for us? Well, and this comes from Ormond McGill, one of the nicest and greatest hypnotists I think who's ever lived. He had 3 magic words: up to now. What you tell yourself, well, everything I've tried hasn't worked out well, up to now. You just add that on. And I've never had a good, happy relationship, up to now. And you create in your mind the mental possibility that you can actually change things around going forward. Because ultimately, the past has no power to affect what happens in the future except the power we give it by allowing us to determine how we respond in the present. What happened in the past is nowhere near as important as what you're going to do next. So that's a way of reminding yourself, even if you're in a bad place and have a history of being in a bad place, that the future is actually open. And if it's open, that you can be a victor going forward. So please feel free to appropriate that concept. But again, it isn't me. It's Ormond McGill in one of his many books. I've lost track of which one it's in, but it's a great concept. The other thing that I would suggest, when you have bullies in your world, and I grew up with quite a few of them, when people bullying you and you remember that bullying and it hurts and you grieve it, it does hurt. What I have gone to is the concept that psychologists are now increasingly calling grit. Grit is the ability to be self-directed going forward in the absence of external reinforcement from other people. So when I wanted to go to a higher education and I wanted to go into a helping profession, and my family had no support for that whatsoever, I persisted anyway because it was what I wanted, because the story I was telling myself in my mind about my victor script, how I was going to become victorious over all the garbage that I had been handed. So I really recommend this to you. Please feel free to use it in your own practices or lives. Thank you again for being here. I'll be back 2:30 Central Time next Saturday with a different Facebook Live. That topic is going to be how to be a spiritual badass. And I think I am, and I know something about that. Take care. Stay well.